My son didn't raise his voice when he took my home. He raised a pen. The strangers he invited called it family space. The invoice he signed called it management. And the forged paper he waved called it care. The worst cut wasn't the money or the keys. It was the moment he leaned in and said, "If this house is too much for you, Dad, we can move you somewhere safe." That sentence tried to turn love into a leash. I answered the only way a man can when his name is being erased, with records, witnesses, and a door that locks from the inside. This is how a quiet father became the last person in his own house to be underestimated, and the first to end it. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. The evening light on the Oregon coast is a quiet thing, more like breath than spectacle. From my deck, the ocean pulled a silver thread through the seam of horizon and shore, and gulls traced long, unhurried loops over Haystack Rock as if they had all the time I had just bought for myself. The house smelled of salt and cedar and a faint edge of new varnish on the oak floors. I had walked the room slowly when I arrived, the way I used to walk a new warehouse, checking flow, looking for bottlenecks, making sure the bones would hold. After 30 years in logistics, you learn that peace is something you stage as carefully as loading a truck. My name is Benjamin Harris. I am 62 years old, and I have retired with a clean ledger and a carefully controlled exhale. When I sold Cascade Freight Works for $3.6 million after taxes, the wire amounts looked unreal on the screen. Thin black numbers pretending to be the cost of time. I left the city with one truckload of furniture and the certainty that the next chapter would be written at my pace. The house at Cannon Beach is 4,800 square feet of redwood frame and glass panes that accept the sky without complaint. In the corner of the living room sits the piano I can almost play, its bench hiding a jar of spare keys, a habit from years of redundancies and contingencies. I keep records. The deed and title live in a fireproof cabinet under the file tab that reads Blue Gull Holdings, LLC, the single-member entity I created so the house would be held by a wall of paper thicker than any argument. There are folders for insurance, permits, short-term rental, and vendors. I am not planning to rent, not yet. But I have learned that the best time to buy an umbrella is when the sun is out. On a brass tide clock, the needle moved toward change. I logged the number in a notebook the way I used to log incoming pallets and felt the old pleasure of order click into place. I unpacked slowly. The framed cover of a James Baldwin essay went above the bookshelf, and a well-loved Coltrane record leaned against the amp below it. The kitchen offered the right kind of silence, the kind that says work has been done and the tools are clean. A bottle of champagne waited in the fridge for a first toast, a small ceremony to bless a large decision. I walked the wraparound deck, letting the wind comb the last city dust out of my hair and the last warehouse noise out of my head. People think retirement is a full stop. For me, it feels like a low gear on a long descent. Nothing harsh, just gravity and a road I chose. Neighbors in this stretch of Cannon Beach don't wave with both arms. They tip a hand from a dune path, then go back to their thoughts. A retired principal 2 houses down keeps to the morning, and a widower across the lane tends roses as if the salt air were fertilizer instead of threat. I prefer it this way. I grew up in neighborhoods where privacy was something you borrowed. Earning it feels like a miracle. Here, a soft hello buys you hours of quiet. Family has never been a simple ledger. My ex-wife and I parted ways long ago, and the math of that decision has mostly stopped wobbling. I raised my son Luke through tuition bills, apartment deposits, and 2 creative launches that never fully left the runway. I paid those invoices with a straight face and the edge of a prayer. Luke is clever, charming in spurts, and endlessly sure that the next opportunity only needs a little nudge from someone who loves him. Rachel, his wife, makes holidays sound cheerful through a speakerphone, and her mother Sarah speaks as if decisions were the natural weather of the world and other people should dress accordingly. I promised myself this house would be mine in the simplest sense, a place where the air moves at the speed of my pulse and any chaos is the kind I choose. I wanted Thanksgiving to feel like invitation, not obligation. I wanted mornings that begin with the kettle and end with a line in a notebook about tide height and wind. I wanted to know what a day sounds like when nobody is asking me for a rush shipment of my time. The first hour passed in pleasant inventory. I checked window seals that would need a thin bead of silicone by fall, noted 2 deck boards that would want tightening after the first winter storm, and measured the living room wall because an old black and white photograph of my father in his Sunday suit would fit there exactly. I placed the photo on the mantel for now. He looks at me in that picture like he knows a secret about endurance. On the kitchen counter, my phone sat face down, still signed into a family group thread I trained myself not to open unless someone typed the word emergency. I took the champagne from the fridge and eased the wire from the cork, letting the pop be modest. There are moments when a man should not advertise his happiness. I poured 1 glass and carried it to the tallest window. The ocean kept its counsel. The house answered back with the softest echo, a sound like welcome. I thought about the men I knew who retired into chaos because they could not give themselves a plan without a paycheck attached to it. I had a plan. It began with Baldwin on the table, Coltrane after dinner, and the knowledge that if anybody asked who lived here, the answer would be I do and I decide. The phone buzzed. I set the glass down and let it ring once, twice. It could be a neighbor I had not met or a freight broker who missed the memo, or a spammer who thinks I still answer to "Sir." It buzzed again with the insistence of something that does not believe in boundaries. I flipped it over and saw my son's name as if it had been stamped there by a notary. The photo in his contact is from a time when hope was cheap and cooperation came easier to both of us. "Hey, Dad," he said when I answered. The room seemed to pull its shoulders back. "Evening, Luke," I said. He narrated his day quickly, the way you read terms and conditions when you intend to click accept. I let him talk. The tide clock ticked with its quiet pivot into a new phase. In that swing of the needle, I felt a door I had just closed trying to open itself. I did not know what he would ask for. I only knew that in a house designed for stillness, the first thing to arrive would be a test of how much stillness I had actually bought. The glass of champagne, untouched, caught the last of the sun. I felt the old habit of taking inventory stir in my chest, of time, of patience, of the cost of letting someone else set the terms. The champagne kept its chill while Luke talked as if shifting bodies into rooms were no different than moving pallets into bays. His voice had the brisk tempo of a foreman closing a schedule gap, each sentence a directive delivered with confidence he had not earned. He suggested the attic room would suit me fine, described how the primary suite should go to Rachel's mother for her niece, assigned the ocean rooms to cousins, and wrapped the whole thing with the fatal flourish that flights were already booked. I let him finish. The tide clock tipped 1 notch closer to change. I told him the house was mine to arrange and heard a pause that sounded like someone mentally redrawing a map. He filled it with a soft-edged threat about a reputable assisted living place near Portland if the house felt like too much for a man my age. I ended the call without raising my voice. Some lines should be drawn with a ruler. I wrote the time and his phrasing in my small ledger. Move up to the attic, flights already booked, assisted living. 30 years in risk taught me that memory is the first witness to fail. The glass of champagne went warm. I poured it down the sink, rinsed the flute, and set it upside down on a towel to dry. A plan is easier to keep when your hands are busy. At 7 the next morning, a convoy of SUVs rolled into the gravel like a tide that had mistaken itself for a parade. Doors burst open and voices arrived ahead of faces. A cooler thumped the threshold, then a second and a third. Someone called for the Wi-Fi password without turning her head. A portable speaker woke itself and tried the room's acoustics. Rachel stood in the entry pointing people toward doors as if she had built them. Sarah rolled her suitcase straight to the primary suite with the practiced purpose of a traveler who believes proximity to the bathroom is a human right. Two cousins drifted to the deck with sandy shoes and leaned on the rail as if the ocean had reserved itself for them. The pantry door opened and a list appeared on the counter, 3 pages of substitutions and preferences that read like a nutritional manifesto. No gluten, no dairy, no soy, only organic, and please avoid brands that taste like cardboard. A niece rearranged the glassware for better flow. Wet towels landed on the back of a leather chair as if leather were a drying rack. The house took it all without complaint. I stood in the seam between kitchen and living room and said good morning to the air. In the window's reflection, I saw the retired school principal on her dune path pause to measure the commotion, then move on with the dignity that anchors this stretch of coast. Habit tugged me to the fireproof cabinet in the garage office. I checked the deed, the Blue Gull Holdings LLC binder, the insurance packet, the short-term rental permit, each tabbed and dated. The jar of spare keys still sat beneath the piano bench. I noted that in the ledger, too. It is not paranoia to confirm what you own when other people are busy inventing their version of it. I made 3 calls from the garage where the scent of cedar is strongest. The first went to Erica Park, who has the kind of calm that makes other people confess details they were not asked to share. I asked her to pull title records and prepare a short memo on unauthorized management claims by family members, including the liabilities that follow when a relative represents themselves as decision maker. The second went to Alan Brooks, my accountant who built the LLC with me and knows exactly who can authorize what. He confirmed what I already knew. I alone bind the property. Any vendor contracts not signed by me are just paper with ink. The third went to David Stone, who does quiet work and produces loud reports. I told him to be on standby for documentation of impersonation, unauthorized listings, and any financial misrepresentations that might sprout when people believe a view of the ocean guarantees impunity. Back inside, the house had been mapped by other hands. The kitchen counter had zones and a schedule pinned underneath a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. I made 1 cup of coffee and did not offer refills. This was not hostility. It was a line that could be seen if anyone chose to look down. I logged the head count, wrote the phrases I heard: family property, Reed Beach Estate. Even though my name is Harris and the estate in question belongs to a limited liability company that signs no holiday cards. I watched the primary suite door close from the inside and knew something important had pivoted. In logistics, there are days when you feel the dock sink a fraction under a load and understand you have a problem you cannot yet name. This felt like that. The difference now was that I was not on a clock and I did not have to please a client. I had time and the patience to let comfort ripen into overreach, and overreach, in my experience, leaves a beautiful trail. Rachel passed through the living room and commented on how the sunlight needed softer curtains. A cousin asked where I kept the beach umbrellas, then frowned when I did not know. A nephew discovered the Bluetooth menu on the stereo and fed the room a playlist he called Mellow Mornings that, to my ear, sounded like a blender full of ice and optimism. Sarah called out from the hall about the height of the showerhead and whether a stepping stool could be found. I answered what needed answering and left the rest to float in the air until gravity took it down. Mid-morning, I stood by the piano and ran my fingers across the closed lid. The wood held steady, patient, underweight. I thought of my father's photograph on the mantel, the way he looked past the camera as if the world were a test to be graded on neatness as much as courage. In the window, the brass tide clock clicked into a new phase. Storms on this coast begin with pressure, not drama. The smart thing is to secure what you can, watch, and write it all down. I moved through the rooms and looked at my life the way an adjuster looks at a claim. What is certain, what is vulnerable, what is missing that should be present. The ledger page filled itself. By noon, the house had acquired the cheerful chaos of a hotel lobby on a holiday weekend. I chose not to be concierge. I chose to be witness. When the day came to separate truth from story, the truth would have timestamps, names, and door handles wiped clean of my fingerprints. By noon, the house wore someone else's fingerprints. Family photos I'd set on the console lay boxed under the stairs, labeled "too corporate" in an unfamiliar hand. My Baldwin frame and the Coltrane sleeve disappeared into a linen closet as if a life's ballast were clutter to be tidied. Wet towels colonized the leather chair like bright flags. The pantry, once arranged by the logic of reach and frequency, had been reshelved for flow. A paper schedule bloomed on the fridge in block letters, "Sunset Cookout, 40 guests." Grocery lists sprouted beneath it, not as suggestions, but as assignments. In the middle of this, Luke dangled spare keys to 2 college friends who had decided to swing by. I watched the handoffs, clocked keycap colors, and noted the moment he introduced himself to Rachel's cousins as the property manager for the Harris family beach estate. The word manager traveled the room the way a roomer tries on a new suit. I retreated to the garage office where the cedar still smelled like a promise. I opened the vendor Rolodex I told myself I no longer needed and found Brian Moreno's card. A chef who can coax elegance from wind and salt air. I ordered an oyster bar on a bed of shaved ice, Dungeness crab chilled and cracked, dry-aged ribeye finished over live flame, champagne service with proper flutes, linens, and crystal. I specified uniformed staff, a poolside layout, and a 5:30 arrival. "Bill to Luke Harris, property manager," I said, giving the property address and asking Brian to confirm by email so the header would capture date and time. I also asked him politely to address his first question on arrival to the property manager. People like to be seen in their titles. I wanted witnesses to the seeing. Tools matter. I slid a small voice recorder beneath the bar tray, let my phone's wide pickup rest on the mantel, and set the camera to unobtrusive intervals from the deck corner. When I drifted back into the living room, I asked the kind of question that sounds like idle curiosity. "You're sure you're managing this?" I said. Luke nodded, easy as breath. "It's brand building for the family," he said. "This place is perfect for connections." The recorder caught the words. My ears filed the tone. By 5:30, the driveway filled with competence. Brian's truck backed in at an angle I admired. His team rolled out silver racks, ice wells, portable burners, and crates of glassware swaddled like heirlooms. Sea air carried the clink of stemware. Salt winds snapped the linens into attention. "Where does the property manager want the champagne station?" Brian asked. Luke stepped forward, chest out just enough to be seen. I stayed still and watched the scene write itself. A runner set Dom on ice. Another wiped each flute until the last fog of breath vanished. Fire took the ribeye with a low hiss. The deck became a dining room that happened to have an ocean attached. I circulated, nodded, and kept my hands in my pockets. I spoke in the way one does at a hotel, warm but unindentured. Guests admired the view, praised the menu, and placed their expectations like plates on a sideboard I had never offered. A visiting realtor produced a card as if the house had requested representation. 2 small business owners from town, neighbors of mine in spirit if not in address, stood by the fence and witnessed more than the menu. They heard who said what and how. At dessert, a quiet drama unfolded near the kitchen island. Brian on cue presented an itemized invoice: oyster bar, crab, ribeye, linens, glassware, staff, and rush fee, totaling $18,400. For Mr. Harris, property manager, he said. A staffer, as arranged, photographed the handover on a tablet used for receipts. Luke's smile thinned but held. He had not imagined a line item for the performance of authority. Before plates were cleared, he offered a toast. He held the stem of a flute like a microphone and positioned the house as our family's platform for meaningful connections. He thanked the management team, by which he seemed to mean himself and any hand that had just clapped. Rachel followed with warm promises about making this a monthly thing. Applause lifted, buoyant and costless. I marked the time, the words, and the faces. Evidence is not just paper. It is a room's agreement to the version of events you intend to contest. Then the house slept the thin, pleased sleep of people who believe a party confers ownership. In the garage office, the screen blinked with the kind of message that threads a needle through the heart of complacency. An alert from a rental platform flagged a new listing: my house, my photos, host name Ben H. Contact email, not mine, description party-friendly, and a nightly rate set below market to accelerate bookings. The images were unmistakable: fresh plates, fresh linens, the exact light from an hour earlier. The copy added a varnish of insult: elderly owner flexible. I captured full-page screenshots, scraped the HTML, and preserved headers. I initiated a takedown for identity misuse and unauthorized commercial use, tagged the platform's legal channel, and copied Erica and David. There are lies that stain. This one bled. Back in the kitchen, I printed Brian's invoice in crisp ink and slid it, face up, to the center of the island beneath the magnet shaped like a lighthouse. The brass tide clock in the window advanced one small degree. In the quiet, you could hear the house do what it was built to do: hold. I checked the fireproof cabinet: deed, insurance, permit, tapped each folder as if it were a shoulder. I did not need to raise my voice. I needed to raise the evidence where the morning could not miss it. The night settled. The ocean withdrew and returned as always, indifferent to our pretensions. In the dark, the outline of Haystack Rock was a witness that asked for nothing but accuracy. I took a last slow turn through the rooms, finding what was certain, what was vulnerable, and what the morning would insist on making clear. Storms here do not announce themselves with thunder. They arrive as a pressure you can chart if you are paying attention. I was. At 7:10 a.m., my kitchen island looked like a command post that had forgotten to salute the owner. Rachel had spread a grid of chores across a legal pad, and Sarah tapped a pen against boxes labeled ice, specialty groceries, and extra propane. The invoice from last night, $18,400 in calm black ink, sat face up beneath the fridge magnet shaped like a lighthouse, ignored with the kind of confidence only other people's money can buy. I kept my mouth closed and my ledger open. I wrote down the phrasing that mattered: Ben will run for, and will need by 11. Words have a way of finding their future audience. The towels still draped the leather chair. The Sunset Cookout 40-guest schedule remained pinned like a merit badge no one had earned. I rinsed a mug, made 1 cup of coffee, and left the kitchen to its volunteers. This chapter was not about argument, it was about structure. The community bank on Hemlock Street still knew customers by name. I asked the branch manager for real-time transaction alerts on every account tied to Blue Gull Holdings, and I set a hard 4 eyes rule: dual confirmation required for any transfer above a threshold we agreed in writing. We opened a dedicated operations account for the property with me as sole signer, stapled a vendor whitelist to the profile, no caterers on it, and added a prominent note: no verbal authorizations accepted. In-person identification or notarized instruction only. I bought a cashier's check for a deck repair estimate I'd been planning anyway, because continuity of ordinary spending reads like stewardship when someone is trying to paint you as reckless. From there, I crossed to the carrier storefront. new eSIM, port-out PIN, SIM swap lock, call forwarding disabled, two-factor apps reseated and backed by hardware codes I wrote onto paper and sealed. I toggled account change notifications to loud and unsubtle. It felt like replacing bolts you know will matter during the next storm. I noted each time stamped to thread into Erica's memo later. I met a representative from North Coast Stays at a cafe where the windows faced a slice of ocean. We signed a contingent property management agreement that did exactly what I needed. Authority to refuse service to disruptive guests, listings only through their verified channels, unauthorized third-party postings defined as misuse, emergency response tree documented line by line. They would not activate the house without my explicit green light, but the contract existed now, a rib in the cage. Copies hit my inbox and Erica's within minutes. We sketched a soft launch calendar for legitimate rentals and small events. It reframed the house as an operation with rules rather than a family free-for-all masquerading as hospitality. At 10:55 a.m., I re-entered my own home to the sound of a blender competing with a playlist that didn't belong to me. The invoice still occupied the center of the island like a truth no one wished to touch. I filed the bank printouts and North Coast Stays cover sheet into Blue Gull Holdings/evidence, mirrored them to the encrypted drive, and returned to the ledger. Safeguards active. Management agreement signed. At the front door, the smart lock rejected my code with a red ring and a friendly cruelty. Credentials changed. Rachel shrugged without apology. Luke updated settings for everyone's convenience. I stepped outside, knelt at the utility box behind the meter, retrieved the mechanical key I had hidden on day one, and let brass do what Bluetooth refused. Unlock my house. I photographed the error message and the time. An email to Erica followed, flagging unauthorized alteration of access control and asking for language clarifying trespass versus familial occupancy when the titled owner is denied codes to his own doors. Sarah suggested I help with the fridge purge. I declined with a neutral sentence about business calls and walked to the garage office. There I inventoried what had gone missing or been displaced. Family photos boxed under the stairs, Baldwin and Coltrane relocated, shelves reshuffled. I wrote exact locations for later restoration and for a damages list if I needed to cost out flow. Before noon, Brian Moreno sent the final invoice and sign-off logs, each page clean, each signature legible. Accepted by Luke Harris, property manager. I forwarded the packet to Alan Brooks with a single line, not authorized by LLC, no vendor payment without my signature. And he replied with our policy in writing, which is another word for oxygen in this climate. I printed the email chain and clipped it to the paper invoice on the island, creating a visible tether between talk and liability. At 12:17 p.m., a coastal realtor called to confirm interest from Luke Harris to list the property for quick sale. I set the phone to speaker. Benjamin Harris, I said, owner via Blue Gull Holdings LLC. No one is authorized to represent or market this property. The agent's voice faltered. I asked her to spell the name she had been given and repeat the claims. I'm recording, I added. She complied, apologized, and promised to amend her file. I wrote a summary and sent it to Erica, asking for a cease and desist template tailored to misrepresentation by family. On the deck, the retired principal 2 doors down offered a small nod that managed to be both neighborly and precise. I logged her name as a potential witness and made no request. Witnesses arrive on their own time. I took panoramic photos through the glass, deck layout reset, the invoice gleaming on the island, timestamps embedded. Context matters. Sometimes it is a piece of paper visible in the background that persuades a future reader more than any speech. The platform that had hosted the unauthorized listing flagged it under review. I sent their legal team the identity packet they requested, copies of my ID, the carrier locks, and last night's images their host account had scraped. David Stone texted to say he was scraping headers and IP artifacts, preserving social posts that called Luke manager, and packaging everything with hashes for chain of custody. I told him to proceed. Then an email landed with the subject line I had expected ever since I heard the phrase assisted living. A meeting request from a law office representing Luke, citing concerns regarding capacity and asset protection. I printed it and placed it beside the catering invoice. 2 pieces of paper, 2 stories that believed themselves about my best interests. The brass-tied clock advanced another patient degree. The day had not been dramatic, but storms rarely respect drama. They respect framing, fasteners, and the discipline to tighten what will hold when the weather decides to measure you. I rinsed the mug, left it to dry, and let the house learn the new shape of my refusal. I would not argue. I would The courier arrived mid-morning with the apologetic smile of someone paid to deliver tension. He held out a stiff envelope from a downtown firm and asked for my signature like a waiter offering a dessert I had not ordered. I time-stamped the receipt on my phone, photographed the envelope front and back, and slid both into a folder labeled Blue Gull Holdings /evidence/legal_incoming. The subject line inside used delicate language for a blunt gambit, concerns regarding capacity and asset protection. I forwarded the PDFs to Erica Park with a plain caption, Luke's Counsel, Capacity Insinuations. By early afternoon, I sat in Erica's glass-walled conference room, a rectangle of neutral wood and patient lighting that made drama look foolish before anyone spoke. Erica occupied the head of the table with a legal pad and a calm that thickened the air. An associate to her right prepared to record. Opposing counsel joined by speakerphone, his voice all velvet caution and manufactured concern. He opened with a preface about family distress and the burdens of large properties, then steered into the words he had wanted to say from the beginning. Limited guardianship. He referenced a power of attorney purportedly signed by me, naming Luke as agent. They screen-shared a PDF. My name appeared where I would expect it, but the signature angle was wrong. The slant of the B too eager, the cross on the H higher than my hand would ever place it. The notary seal date matched a day I was in Boise, a fact my airline confirmation and hotel folio have no reason to lie about. Erica requested the original ink copy for inspection and walked the room, calmly stating our expectations about spoliation and chain of custody. She might as well have placed traffic cones around a crash site. Then she opened a binder whose rings made a small, satisfying click. Inside, the articles and operating agreement for Blue Gull Holdings, naming me as sole manager, the deed and title, the insurance packet, the short-term rental permit, and the catering invoice accepted by Luke Harris, property manager. She laid down still photographs and short transcript excerpts from Luke's public claims the previous night, brand building for the family, managing the property. Last, she set travel proofs for Boise on the table and noted a discrepancy in the notary registry hours we had already queued as a public record check. Facts do not raise their voices. They form a perimeter and invite you to test it. Opposing counsel tried a different approach, the soft undersong that turns worry into leverage. He implied I must be overwhelmed. A big house, complex tasks, new routines. Erica answered with the bank safeguards enacted that morning, the carrier locks and authentication resets, the contingent management agreement with North Coast stays, and a maintenance schedule so dull in its specificity it sparkled as evidence of competence. When she spoke of apparent agency versus actual authority, it landed like a level against a wall. Luke's public posturing, she explained, creates no power over an LLC that has not granted it. There was no actual authority, no ratification, and no accepted benefit. Continued claims would trigger a cease and desist followed by tortious interference filings. I slid a copy of the coastal noise inspection log into the stack. A neighbor complaint had routed inspectors to our address the previous night. The form recorded event organizer Luke Harris. It functioned as a mirror. You say you do not manage? The town heard you say you do. The call ended without an agreement. Erica sent our demands in writing. Retract any communications to brokers, halt every version of the word management, surrender copied keys and codes, and produce the original POA within 72 hours. We stepped into the hallway. The tide clock in her reception area advanced a degree. I felt a pressure system assemble out of paper and intention. Late afternoon, David Stone texted an alert. A new TikTok account had posted a montage that used my face and my house as props under captions that said unstable, hoarder of space, elderly owner flexible. The music tried to make pity sound fashionable. Frames were scraped from the unauthorized rental listing. Comments stacked quickly, and a realtor from town had been tagged to watch the pile-on. I preserved the video in every useful way: full-page screenshots, source HTML, a network export that folded in upload time and handle hints. Erica fired a DMCA takedown for unauthorized use of images and a demand that the platform preserve server logs. David began attribution work: IP hops, device fingerprint, overlap in the social graph with Luke and Rachel. People forget that the internet keeps different books than they do. I wrote a short email to the neighborhood listserv, practical and bloodless, no family details. A single paragraph stating that no one is authorized to manage, sell, or list the property. Any public claim to the contrary is false. I attached a one-page summary: LLC ownership, North Coast stays on standby for legitimate rentals, and a direct, non-hostile contact channel for concerns. The note did not ask for belief, it offered a standard. After dinner, I went to the police station and filed an incident report. The words on the lines were not poetry: alleged forged POA, impersonation, unauthorized listing, digital harassment. I handed over a packet, screenshots of the listing and the TikTok, audio clips of Luke calling himself manager, the catering invoice stamp and handoff photo, the realtor call log, and a timeline written like a bill of lading. The clerk gave me a case number, which Erica added to the letterhead of every notice that would go out next. Vendors and platforms began to align. North Coast Stays confirmed the takedown in progress and promised declarations if duplicates surfaced. Brian Moreno emailed a sworn service affidavit describing how he asked for the property manager and was directed to Luke, to whom he presented the invoice and from whom he received acknowledgement. Paper whittles narrative down to what can be sworn. Luke called at dusk with a voice carefully tuned to reasonable. He suggested we de-escalate and convene a family council to formalize his role. I gave him one sentence suitable for court and closed the line: no one but me has authority over this property. I logged the time and did not argue. The smear video spawned a blog post in a local tourism forum that quoted the TikTok as gospel. Erica sent a notice of defamation to the forum host, attached our case number, and made the kind of gentle demand that tends to be obeyed by people who do not want to rent their servers to lawsuits. Before bed, I set tomorrow's checklist on a yellow pad, pull the notary registry, assemble an APS readiness packet, medication list, food in the fridge, maintenance receipts, bank alerts, carrier locks. Because weaponized concern often invites a welfare check. I placed the pad beside the catering invoice on the kitchen island. Two truths about the same story sat shoulder to shoulder. The house was quiet, but the quiet had weight now. Pressure had a shape I could point to: paper, pixels, and a signature tilted just enough to betray the hand that drew it. The ocean kept its rhythm. The clock turned. I rinsed a glass and left it to dry. Storm weather favors frame things that do not move when pushed. The doorbell rang at 10:02 a.m., a single clear note that felt less like company and more like audit. On the porch stood a woman with a badge and a clipboard and the manner of someone who has learned to be kind without yielding. Adult Protective Services. I opened wide and let the light in with her. The refrigerator shelves were stocked and dated. The medication organizer sat on the counter with times and dosages written in my handwriting. Maintenance receipts were clipped together beside a neat stack of bank alert emails and a summary of the security changes I had made to my phone account. I presented my ID and the operating agreement for Blue Gull Holdings, LLC, then walked her through food supply, meds, emergency contacts, and the contingent agreement with North Coast Stays that would snap into place if I ever needed help. She asked about stressors, support networks, the event 2 nights prior. I handed over the police case number and the law firm notice that had arrived like a curtain line on a stage I never asked to stand on. She toured quietly, opened and closed drawers, eyed trip hazards, and finally said the words that mattered. No evidence of neglect or exploitation. She would recommend the report be closed as unfounded. I logged her name, badge number, and the time in my ledger before the door clicked shut. At the kitchen island, I wrote a 1-paragraph summary of the visit, attached photos of what she had seen, and sent everything to Erica Park for the record. There is a satisfaction to turning the day into paper before anyone else gets to name it. I looked at the yellow pad beside the catering invoice and felt the axis slide. Enough absorbing. It was time to shape the story with filings that required other people to keep deadlines. I called David Stone and widened his mandate from documentation to forensics. I wanted landlord verification at Luke's studio, vendor payables and collections inquiries, a search of civil filings, a lawful credit pull that would show if the ground under my son's feet had been mortgaged to a future that included me incapacitated. I asked for social graph clustering around the TikTok account, device overlap checks, and a written report with exhibits. He said he understood and that the work would be thorough. We both knew what we expected to find: arrears, maxed revolving credit, and a HELOC inquiry that used the phrase anticipated inheritance like a life raft. Erica's reply landed with the soft weight of something heavy. A draft stack waited. A temporary restraining order prohibiting contact, proximity, and interference with invitees, tenants, or vendors. A harassment complaint built from digital and in-person conduct. A tortious interference claim for the unauthorized listing, the realtor misrepresentation, and the event, and a demand for the original POA within 72 hours with notice of intent to refer forgery to the district attorney if it failed to appear. I read line by line, approved the language, and watched her calendar the filings with a precision that felt like weatherproofing. I changed the mechanical deadbolt cylinder on the front door and bagged the old core with a date and my initials. Deliveries would be curbside now, no unknown vehicles past the gravel line. I registered a separate VoIP number for vendors and renters so my personal line would not carry the weight of the day's noise. Small changes, but small changes close gaps, and gaps are where opportunists crawl. Erica proposed a face-to-face for tomorrow afternoon in her office with Luke and counsel. The agenda was simple: keys and codes surrendered, written retraction to brokers, acknowledgement that Luke holds no authority here. I asked her to prepare a printed exhibit packet for the room: noise inspection log, invoice acceptance, realtor call transcription, and the APS visit summary. People behave differently when paper is within reach of other people's hands. David called back before 3 with the kind of preliminary that speeds a choice rather than complicates it. Luke's studio rent was 3 months in arrears. His landlord had emails referencing family funds incoming. Rachel's 4 credit cards sat near their limits. A recent cash advance matched the party's expenses almost down to the hour. A mortgage inquiry showed a HELOC application that referenced expected inheritance. The most instructive part was older: emails to 3 guardianship attorneys from 6 months ago with subject lines that didn't bother to hide their purpose. I filed the memo under evidence O/Stone/prelim and forwarded it to Erica with a note that did not try to name what I felt. Before dusk, I photographed what the day had made indisputable: The stocked fridge, the med tray, the invoice and yellow pad, the deadbolt core in a bag, the front door from inside, the mailbox holding the law firm notice, timestamps anchored each image, backup synced to the encrypted drive, and the checksum receipt slid into its folder. The ritual mattered as much as the result. It told me I had been a good steward of the truth while others tried to lease it. My phone chimed with a text from Luke just as the tide clock shifted a degree you only notice if you've lived with that clock a while. We should talk before the lawyers. I logged the message and did not respond. I set the exhibit binder on the table by the door like a packed bag for a trip I would take only once. The house felt steadier than it had since the first evening, not because the pressure had eased, but because it finally had shape. Choice had been made. The rest would be fallout, and fallout is easier to sweep when the floor is level. David's report landed like a box on a loading dock. A thud, a puff of digital dust, the certainty of weight. The cover memo was clipped to exhibits. Screenshots, a landlord statement, batches of email headers, creditor notices pulled through lawful channels. The story it told was not new to my gut, only newly arranged on paper. Luke's studio rent stood 3 months behind, with a chain of messages promising family funds incoming. Rachel's 4 revolving cards hovered near their limits, a cash advance timestamp mapped almost perfectly onto the catering load in the night of the party. A mortgage inquiry showed a HELOC application that used the phrase expected inheritance, the way a drowning man uses a board. Older still were the emails to 3 guardianship attorneys from 6 months back, subject lines that did not bother to blush. I filed the packet to the stone folder, forwarded a clean copy to Erica, and breathed the quiet that follows confirmation. Consequences travel on unmarked roads. I placed a measured call to Luke's commercial landlord, verified what David had already documented, and made no accusations. I asked for dates and amounts, wrote them down, and thanked him for clarity. Afterward, per Allen's guidance, I submitted fraud watch notices to the relevant card issuers, not to accuse anyone of a crime, but to alert them to potential misuse tied to my address or property. It was a way of installing speed bumps where someone planned to drive through. Allen himself sent a policy letter that read like ballast. No vendor disbursement without my signature, apparent agency blocked at accounting, weekly exception reports scheduled. I acknowledged receipt, dropped the PDF into the finance/controls folder, and let the certainty of rules soothe the part of me that keeps wanting to explain. Explanation is for family. Controls are for everybody else. Mid-morning, the retired school principal from 2 doors down walked the dune path with a folded note and the exact posture of someone who has watched a lot of teenage drama and learned to be brief. She had written the date and time of the gala deliveries and the sentence she heard, property manager, spoken by the man who accepted the rentals. I scanned the page, logged it under witness observations, and offered nothing in return but thanks. Facts travel best when unescorted by opinions. Luke called shortly after noon. The wire in his voice hummed with panic he tried to braid into reason. Pause whatever you started. I kept my answer built for an affidavit. All inquiries are factual verifications about my property and identity. I logged the time and let the dial tone gather itself on the other end. Platforms move at their own speeds until a lawyer's hand touches the wheel. The TikTok smear switched to removed, IP violation, with a case ID. The tourism forum unlisted the Echo post and requested more information. David captured final screenshots, headers, and confirmation emails, salted them into a folder labeled defamation/preserved, and sent me a checksum. The air felt marginally cleaner, though I knew better than to confuse a quiet moment with a finished job. Then a counter-narrative knocked. A producer from Coastal 9 reached out, having seen the defamation notices circulate, and wanted a small segment on responsible senior ownership on the coast. No family names, no feud, just permits, quiet hours, and the virtue of paper over gossip. I agreed with conditions so spare they sounded like common sense. No mention of Luke, no sensational framing, one sentence from me at most. Public truth works better when it doesn't look hungry. North Coast Stays emailed an hour later with a different kind of knock. A Veterans Foundation, referred by a prior guest who had read my neighborhood message, asked to hold a small beachside ceremony next month. Head count capped, no amplified music after 8, chairs on pads to protect the deck. We penciled a tentative date. I could feel the property's public identity pivot from hotel lobby to stewarded space. Rachel tried soft power by text. Let's split calendar and share expenses. I screenshotted the message, archived it, and didn't reply. A split is a gift, a share is a bargain. Neither applies to a man being asked to finance his own erasure. Erica worked the escalator, filings finalized. Temporary restraining order, harassment complaint, tortious interference claim, and the 72-hour demand for the original POA. Couriers queued, cease and desist letters to brokers, and platforms prepped. I e-signed where she needed my hand and watched the digital confirmation stack like stones across a river. I sent the block a brief thank you, noting that unauthorized content had been removed and inviting reports of any disturbances directly to me for documentation. I called North Coast Stays to limit any future media crew to 2 people, daytime only, and logged the call with a short sentence about quiet hours. Calming edges is easier than repairing them. Feedback from the edges returned. Luke's landlord acknowledged my verification and hinted that assurances have shifted. A card issuer replied that activity would be monitored and that any account attempting to tie my property to its profile would trigger enhanced checks. It felt like tightening bolts you hope you never have to test. Coastal 9 taped the segment that afternoon with a crew so small it might have been a favor. The camera drifted over the tide clock, the labeled folders, the maintenance logs, the piano bench with the jar of keys. No faces, no accusations, just the grammar of stewardship. I gave them the single line we had agreed on and meant it when I said it. Stewardship is paperwork you do before the storm. The producer thanked me for not making it a feud, and for the first time in days, the house exhaled. I returned Baldwin to the shelf and Coltrane to the amp, took a quiet photograph of both as if resetting a room could also reset a pulse. I drafted a gentle house rule sheet for future events. Head count, hours, deck pads, and pinned it inside a cabinet door where a guest would find it without being shamed by it. Order is not only for courts, it is for living rooms that want to remain themselves. As evening leaned in, I assembled the exhibit binder for tomorrow. David's prelim memo tabbed in blue, the landlord note in yellow, platform takedown IDs in gray, invoice acceptance, noise log, and the APS closure note stacked like a small wall. In the front pocket, on an index card, the 2 sentences I would carry into the room and keep. No authority but mine. Further claim is harassment. A final text from Luke arrived before the light went down. Can we fix this? I logged it and let the phone rest. The binder waited by the door with my wallet and keys. The house hummed at its old frequency, a sound like refrigerated air and settled wood. The tide clock moved a degree, steady as a pulse you've chosen to count. Fallout had done its work. The air was clear enough to see the table where it would end. Erica's conference room had the kind of quiet you rent by the hour. Glass walls, neutral wood, a view of blue sky squared into panes. On the table, she'd aligned our exhibit binders by color. Blue for David Stone's report, yellow for the landlord note, gray for platform takedowns, red for the forged POA demand, green for the APS closure. Beside them sat 2 envelopes I'd labeled by hand, A, withdraw and cease, B, proceed and litigate. My index card lay in front of me like a compass with only 2 directions, no authority but mine. Further claim is harassment. Luke came in with a lawyer and the kind of posture that looks like confidence from a distance and fatigue from close up. Rachel sat a chair back from him as if proximity could matter without signatures. Erica's associate opened a notebook and waited for verbs. Erica began the way good weather does, no thunder, just air that makes drama feel silly. She recapped the APS visit and its outcome: unfounded. She listed the safeguards in place: bank controls, carrier locks, the management agreement with North Coast stays. Then she set the spine of evidence on the table: the invoice accepted by Luke Harris, property manager, the noise inspection log naming him organizer, the realtor call transcript where he claimed to represent the owner, screenshots of the unauthorized listing, and the date conflict on the POA with my Boise proofs. "We are not here to debate feelings," she said, voice level. "We are here to cease false authority and protect a lawful owner." I slid envelope A across the table first. Inside were terms that fit on a single page because clarity travels faster than argument. Immediate surrender of all keys and codes, written retractions to any brokers or platforms, an end to every version of the words manager and owner in relation to my property, and a promise to avoid contact with tenants and vendors. A no-contact stipulation would keep distance between them and the house. In exchange, I would pause any criminal referral on the POA and not pursue damages for the gala invoice or reputational harm, so long as there were no violations. The effective period had no sunset. The one-strike clause needed no footnote. Then I slid envelope B. It contained the other story, the one built for court: the drafted TRO, the harassment complaint, the tortious interference claim, and the referral packet on forgery ready for the district attorney. Affidavits, Brian Moreno's among them, platform takedown IDs preserved by David, and Stone's prelim findings, arrears, cash advance timestamps, HELOC inquiry, and the emails to guardianship attorneys. Erica spoke about consequences the way architects describe load: public record, discovery into finances, fees and sanctions, and the kind of impact on credit and housing that does not retire quietly. Luke's lawyer tried to rent the language of concern. He spoke of capacity questions, of family councils, of formalizing roles so responsibility wouldn't be lonely. Erica answered with the maintenance schedule I keep, like a calendar of tides, the bank and carrier policies, the management agreement, the APS result. "A parent agency does not become authority because it was shouted over dinner," she said. The sentence sat down and did not move. Luke looked at me the way a younger man looks at an older man he once believed would always pivot toward mercy. "We can split the calendar and share expenses," he said. His voice asked to be understood, even as his math asked to be forgiven. I kept my reply short enough to be quoted. "There will be no split," I said. "Return what is mine. Stop claiming what is not." Erica called a 10-minute caucus. Luke leaned toward his counsel. Rachel leaned toward him. The room did what rooms do when paper is present and the air is thin. It waited. I breathed through my nose, touched the edge of the index card with a fingertip, and didn't add a single word to the record that didn't need to exist there. They came back with the decision in Luke's jawline before the words found his lawyer. He chose envelope A. What followed was choreography. The key and code surrender form went around the table. They listed devices, transferred the SmartLock admin email to me, and scheduled a full log export within 24 hours. Retraction letters to the brokers and platform hosts were drafted on screen and e-signed in the room. A courier was queued. The no-contact and non-interference agreement took longer, not because the language was complex, but because the act of initialing each page is a kind of education. Erica signed where needed, I countersigned, and the associate numbered the exhibits as if numbers could soften facts. Erica read breach protocol into the record. Any violation would trigger automatic filing of the TRO, harassment complaint, and tortious interference claim with immediate referral to the district attorney on the forgery packet. I added one line to the agreement because loopholes breed in silence. Any outreach to tenants or neighbors about me or the property is interference. The associate wrote it exactly, not a comma more. Copies were distributed. Erica placed the originals into a safe with a soft, final click. Digital scans hit my encrypted vault a minute later. We stood. Luke did not meet my eye. Rachel gathered her purse and a silence and left behind both. By early evening, the locksmith confirmed a master reset on the smart lock and archived the audit log. North Coast Stays received the no-contact order and updated their watch list, noting that any attempted bookings tied to familiar names would bounce before mischief could find a date. I sent the neighbors a brief thank you for patience. No names, no noise, just a line that said the house would continue to observe quiet hours and common courtesies. An email pinged while the last light flattened across the parking lot outside Erica's windows. The Veterans Foundation finalized their ceremony booking and posted a deposit that hit the operations account where money belongs when it intends to behave. At home, I set the exhibit binder on my desk beside Baldwin, returned to the shelf, and Coltrane to the amp. The piano bench held its small jar of spare keys, though tonight it felt more like a reliquary than a backup plan. The tide clock in the living room kept its patient geometry. Boundaries do not arrive when you win an argument. They arrive when you build a structure strong enough to hold the same answer again and again without raising your voice. The house was quiet in the old way, the way that doesn't ask permission to continue. I turned off the lamps one by one and let the dark sit where it belonged, on the other side of the glass and not between the people who have to live in here. 6 months is enough time for a coastline to remind you who is in charge. We moved from summer's churn to the shoulder season's clear air, daylight pooled in the afternoons, nights cooled by a breeze that carried the smell of kelp and wet cedar. The house found its old frequency again, doors shut softly, drawers closed without comment, guests asked before moving a chair. The ledger said what I wanted the rooms to feel. Steady inputs, predictable outputs, nothing dramatic but the light. The Veterans Foundation ceremony came first on the calendar and set the tone I intended to keep. North Coast Stays oversaw a small head count with chairs on pads to protect the deck boards. The officiant spoke without amplification. The ocean did the rest. Their post-event report read like the results column of a good day. 0 complaints, 0 incidents. 2 weeks later, an email arrived from a family who had attended Bennett's, inquiring about a wedding with the same constraints. Deposit posted. House rules attached as part of the proposal rather than as an apology. I signed and watched the operations account accept money that behaved. Operations became a routine rather than a set of rescues. Utilities went on to autopay. I tightened deck screws and replaced storm seals before the first Pacific tantrum. Twice a month, I walked the perimeter with a notebook and a pencil, marking hairline shifts in boards and the way the gutter at the northwest corner likes to test your attention. The management company sent their scheduled inspection notes with photos and timestamps. I matched them to my own. Numbers behave under supervision. So do houses. I kept a promise I had written on the first page of a fresh ledger. Donate 5% of net event income to the community college's Maritime and Trade Scholarship Fund. The foundation sent a thank you note on cardstock that felt like something you keep. I filed it the way you file a receipt for dignity. Reputation, the part of a house you can't sand or seal, repaired itself in increments. Coastal Nine's piece, quiet and unsensational, kept circulating. The Chamber of Commerce linked to it in a list of best practices for short-term rentals on the coast. Platform records showed takedowns sustained and duplicates blocked before they learned to crawl. My neighborhood message remained pinned on the listserv, one paragraph about quiet hours, permits, and who to call if concern turned into noise. Twice, handwritten notes appeared in my mailbox, thanking me for quiet management during tourist spikes. I slid them into a subfolder labeled Witness/Thank You. Not because I needed evidence, but because it is good to remember who noticed. Inside, small restorations completed the larger one. Baldwin returned to the shelf. Coltrane leaned by the amp. The piano bench's jar of spare keys became more symbol than plan, the smart lock now properly administered and audited. The brass-tied clock kept its patient metronome, a small geometry in a world that loves drama. Mornings began with coffee, a tide log entry, and a short walk on the damp sand to count the day's boats. Evenings ended with the kind of quiet a man recognizes as earned rather than borrowed. Business leaves traces, so do apologies. Through counsel, Luke sent a letter on proper letterhead with the words he had stored for when their market value rose, an apology for misjudgments and stressors, a request for visitation rights to the property, and an ask for my mentorship to rebuild his business. It suggested a willingness to share costs in the future. Paper can be contrite without being specific. I forwarded it to Erica and asked for a response that neither punished nor indulged. Her reply read like the line between a fence and a wall, acknowledgement of receipt, no visitation to the property, no authority now or later. And if Luke sought any relationship beyond the ones already bound by law, prerequisites that respected the damage done. Documented debt repayment, therapy or financial counseling completion, a written acknowledgement of past misrepresentation and harassment. All contact through counsel. Any indirect pressure on neighbors or tenants would count as interference and reactivate filings. She sent the letter, filed the send receipt, and went back to the work of making sure my boundaries existed even when I wasn't looking at them. Loose ends found their shelves. Chef Brian Moreno obtained a small claims judgment against Luke for the gala invoice after several polite attempts failed. The court record noted my non-involvement. The realtor who had accepted Luke's story sent a retraction to her mailing list and archived a clarification with the association. The police case retained its number in a folder that stayed closed by the one-strike terms of the agreement Luke had signed at Erica's table. Sometimes justice looks like the absence of additional lines in a report. I will allow this. There is a grief to it, an honest one. A son I funded through semesters and deposits and 2 launches that never lifted. Now lives at the distance of paperwork and conditions. Family is supposed to be warmer than a PDF. But grief does not have a vote on stewardship. The house, the ledger, the people who rent my trust for a weekend, they need a man who makes decisions at the speed of truth. Integrity feels less like a virtue than a job description you give yourself because no one else will do it for you. Community kept showing up dressed like small acts. The retired principal left a peach pie on my porch with a card that said, "Steady is a gift." I added the note to the Witness/Thank You folder because grace deserves an index. A neighbor on the lane waved me over to admire his late roses and asked if I still track tides. I told him yes, because a clock that keeps faith is no small thing. As season's edge sharpened, the Bennett wedding took its turn. The ceremony lasted 22 minutes, the vows steadier than the breeze. The photographers used tripods on pads, the caterer carried in more modestly than he left, and the last chair was folded before the first star settled above haystack. The operations account logged the deposit and the balance. The ledger logged the donation to the scholarship fund. Quiet followed, not the brittle kind that fears interruption, but the kind that expects courtesy and has receipts for it. That evening, I stood on the deck with a glass lifted not to victory but to stewardship. Offshore, a fishing boat kept its patient green. The tide clock split the difference between ebb and flow with the indifference of an honest instrument. I wrote one line in the ledger I keep for things that deserve plain language. Quiet kept, accounts clean, doors locked from the inside. It was not triumph. It was the record of a boundary that held. In the morning, I would return to coffee in the notebook, to Baldwin's indentation on the shelf, and Coltrane's promise of a night when the wind demands horns. But tonight, I let the house tell me what I had wanted to hear 6 months ago and had not. You live here. You decide. The rest is weather and other people's plans, and neither belongs on my side of the door. Dusk on the coast doesn't argue. It settles. Windows open a finger for salt air, the brass tide clock rests between marks, and the house, my house, breathes like a chest that has finally learned a steady rhythm. This isn't a victory lap, it's a field guide I wish I'd handed myself before the doorbell, before the invoice, before the word care arrived dressed as control. I mistook quiet for a contract. I believed stillness would read as respect, and it read, at least to some, as vacancy. The lesson cost me a weekend, a stack of signatures, and a family myth I'd been carrying like an unpaid bill. Paperwork translated the hurt into facts. Timestamps, invoices, witness notes, a forged date, pinned to a travel receipt. Feelings can be contested, documents tend to hold. Loving a son doesn't mean surrendering a name. I gave Luke years of open doors. Tuition, deposits, lifelines, and called it support. He called it precedent. Saying no finally didn't feel noble. It felt like sanding a splinter you should have pulled the first time it pricked. I wrote one reminder on an index card and keep it where I can see it. Grace is not the same as keys. Stewardship reduced to practice fits into 3 rules. First, title and structure. The asset lives in the right vehicle with authority pointing in one direction. Second, access and alerts. Locks that log, accounts that confess, a plan for the day, not the if someone tests them. Third, community and counsel. One neighbor who will write what they saw, one attorney who files what you can stand behind. None of this is romantic. All of it is humane. Paper isn't suspicion. It's kindness to your future self. The smear burned quick and cold because records weighed more than appetite. Platforms are weather. Evidence is ballast. Reputation returned in increments, quiet events that ended on time, neighbors who waved, a management report that kept saying 0 incidents. I donated 5% of net event income to the local scholarship fund and filed the thank you note like a receipt for optimism. Small proofs, stacked, become a life you recognize. Inside, the symbols are back where they belong. Baldwin's spine catches lamplight. Coltrane rests by the amp. The piano bench holds its jar of spare keys, kept for memory, not dependence. House rules live inside a cabinet door, visible but not loud. The deed sits behind a tab in a drawer I open less often now, not because I'm complacent, but because I don't need to check whether I still live here. If there's a word for aging that doesn't sound like apology, it might be precision. I speak less and document more. Mornings have a sequence that fits a human day. Coffee, tide log, short walk, a page in the ledger. Work ends on time. Music starts when the wind asks for horns. I used to mistake competence for posture. It turns out competence is the absence of chaos where there could be some. Tonight I write the last line of this season in the ledger. Boundaries held, hospitality intact. I set down the pen and let the ink dry without flourish. I didn't win a fight. I built a frame, then learned to live inside it. Outside, the water keeps its appointment with the moon. Inside, the doors lock from the inside, because that is where I am, and because I said so on paper first. In the end, what endures isn't the noise, but the structure, habits that keep faith when weather turns and voices waver. Peace is not the absence of pressure, it's the presence of terms we set while our hands are steady. Stewardship asks for paper, patience, and the courage to say no without malice. Boundaries are a kind of love, for the life we've built, for the neighbors who rely on our quiet, and for the self that must live with every signature. Thank you for spending this time with the story. If something in it echoed a truth you've lived, share your thoughts below. What moment stayed with you most, and why? We read every comment, and your perspective helps this community grow. If you'd like more tales of resilience and hard-won peace, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll never miss what comes next. Tell us where you're watching from and what you'd like to see next. Until then, take good care and keep your boundaries kind and firm.